world is not acceptable morally or otherwise to society as a whole, even though it exists. All right, and then you have Matt Damon's character. He's considered a hero. He's considered like, you know, at this point a global icon. You know, and because he's doing something that is viewed by most people as for the benefit of humanity as a whole to move forward in, you know, evolution or technology or knowledge, whereas in Tangerine it actually is just the kind of like the underbelly of society kind of thing. And this is what the and this brings it back to what the directors or the producer's ultimate goal is, right? You have one in The Martian. The ultimate goal is a feel good, family oriented, family friendly movie that shows the ingenuity and hopeful resilience of humanity. And then on the other side, the Sean Baker wanted to show you the existence of this underbelly of society that, hey, look, you know, they're not heroes. None of them are heroes, and yet here they are. This is what it's like. Nobody likes to have a bloody nose, but you do, you know, and it's dirty and it's bloody and it's messy. But the value of life, right? Value of life is a little bit different in both incidences. So, you know, they paid a lot of money to get Matt Damon back home there, but when he came back home, you know, he still had to work. He didn't get that $1 billion that they spent to send him home. You know, whereas on the other end, you know, they have a life that they probably feel like they can't really get out of, or they're trying to get out of, but it's a tough life in the movie Tangerine. It's a pretty tough life. Nobody wants to go through it, but here it is. You know, so I guess the ultimate blame falls to God, I guess. You know,
Well,
I mean, these are two very like tough situations. It's like I'm not really sure if there is anyone to blame. You know, I mean, I guess you can blame the abusers versus the victims, but as far as pathways in life, you know, it's like that's kind of a tough one to blame anybody in either situations.
well, I'm just saying that in The Martian, they do so much for this person, but the only reason that they do this much for Matt Damon is because of how much they value him, how much they value his life. They're willing to, you know, to move heaven and earth to make this happen, and it doesn't benefit anyone but. In the end, it doesn't benefit anyone but Matt Damon. This that they're saving him, they're rescuing him, isn't actually a benefit to, you know, humankind as a whole. It's just a benefit to him. Um, you know, and it's great that they can do it. And I think the theme of The Martian is look what human ingenuity can accomplish. You know, that with the right ingenuity, you can survive, you know, in all of these, you know, crazy situations. You can make this work. However, you know, it's really at the end of the day, it's just for his benefit to survive. And it doesn't actually benefit the rest of us. It's just benefiting him. You know, this guy here. and and I feel like that is where we get into some of the contrast. The contrast is that we value in this movie, that we're told to value, we're assumed to value Matt Damon's life a lot more than we're assumed to value the lives of Alexandra and Cindy. And so going on to the contrast side of things. So, you know, it's not really necessarily stated, but, you know, part of the plot, you know, obviously this is all spoiler territory, but it is when there is a betrayal. So Alexandra betrays Cindy. However, when you look at all of this, it doesn't feel like that betrayal is casual. It feels like that betrayal is based on a competition for resources. That whether it's drugs, whether it's food or money, that Alexandra did what she did, not for, personal reasons or lust or love, none of those things. She did it because it's something she needed to do to survive. She felt at the time that that's what she needed to do. She wanted drugs, she wanted something else. And Chester is the beneficiary here, where he is doling out these resources based upon what he can achieve for himself. The point of this is that, in the Martian, there's no competition. Everyone just gives Matt Damon's character what he needs, and his only competition is against nature, not against other people. But in Tangerine, they are constantly fighting, even with each other, because that's why it's difficult for them to maintain a friendship. Even though they have a friendship, it's difficult for them to maintain it because they, in the end, must compete with each other to survive. And they have to compete with everyone to survive. So half of this is with Dina being dragged around, or Dinah being dragged around, because she has to compete with Dinah too. Dinah is another part of that competition. She's competing with what they call fish, fish women versus trans women. They're all competing. And the other side of that, and then I'll kind of close this part, but the other side of that is that everyone is watching and paying attention to the Martian. He's top of the news in every possible case, whereas in Tangerine, it's almost like this is what we don't want to see. This is
Right.
the part of life we don't want to look at. We don't want to know that this is happening. And I think that the mother-in-law is the best, representation of that. Is she's the one that says, "Oh my God, this is horrible! I can't believe this is happening. Look at what this crazy person is doing." Speaking of Rasnick, this is what we don't want to see happening. This is terrible. So I think that's another thing, is that we are all meant to be proud of Matt Damon's character, and we are meant to ignore and look away from Cindy and Alexandra.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with that. Again, like they are the ones that in Tangerine, that whole society there is something that what I guess the norms of society would consider to be um, like bad or negative or something. So nobody wants to look at that, even though there are real human beings there being put through life that way. And then of course they don't receive help. They don't receive help from anybody, because that's the whole point of that movie, is that, hey, look, here we are, we're surviving. We need money in order to buy food and clothes in order to survive and eat. Whereas a Matt Damon, in the Martian movie, he reminds me of the story of the kid that fell in the well and got stuck there, and the whole world was watching.
Yeah.
How to rescue him, and somehow that kid who was too unaware that there's a hole there on the ground, and he jumped in and gets stuck. He becomes an icon, a hero, right? Even though he was actually the one that needed to be rescued. So, of course, Matt Damon, of course, being Jason Bourne, he affected his survival pretty smoothly, I guess, right? He patched himself up, he grew potatoes, and he was able to survive a lot longer than he should have, because he was able to science the crap out of it, right? So,
well, I like your point there, because there's always that idea that Nancy Kerrigan gets hit in the shin with a pole or something. She's not really even injured, but she gets hit. And then the like that obscures the news from, you know, a dozen women of color in various places who have met a terrible end. You know, it's just like there's always this kind of representation where you know, we're going to we're sort of trained to value the life of particularly young white woman versus, you know, other people who are in much worse situations, enduring
Yeah.
much worse problems, but they're not a young white blonde, you know, like Elizabeth Smart, for example, is
Yeah.
she's that typical you know, and she captures the news. And if you look through these you know, the news is the media's favorite victims. They are that kind of like young white woman, that usually blonde, you know, that have, you know, endured something like Gabby. I think Gabby, what was her name? Gabby Petito recently, who was murdered by her boyfriend. Captures the news. Everyone wants to know what happens to this person, but if you put the same thing, you put the same story or a worse story in front, and that person isn't, you know, young, white, and blonde, that news is like, yeah, okay, what happened?
Yeah, that's it's tough to say that, because you know we're in a society that's supposed to be woke and you know 2022, but I agree with you. I think it's very difficult to find the face of America that isn't, you know, white and blonde and blue-eyed, right? Even though kids of color go missing every day. You know what? Who decides that? Oh, you know, this one kid gets to be plastered all over the news everywhere and says, you know, we need to rescue her or him over, you know, 100, 1,000 kids a day going missing or something like that. You know, they you don't even know about them. You know, so it's like
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing here in America. I know that when I lived in Germany, it was a different situation because you know they were pretty much two dominating races there, which is the German race and then the Turkish over there. Even though there was everybody in between as well, they're a very diverse group there. But from what I remember, the news made it very evenly. I mean, whenever there was a kid missing, they plastered that all over the news, and there wasn't like a preference one over the other. They were just there. You know, this kid is missing. But here in America, you might hear something about it for like a day or two, but if there's all of a sudden some very good looking you know, handsome or cute kid that goes missing, oh, you know, that's the next face of America there. You know, so it's troubling, I think, in a way. I think it's troubling in a way.
It's difficult to think that if the actors had been reversed. So imagine that it is Matt Damon who is playing a role in Tangerine. And then it is, you know, I think it was Maya Taylor and Kiki. I have to go back and look. Unfortunately,
I don't remember their names
their names.
either.
Kiki Rodriguez. Yeah, Maya Taylor and Kiki Rodriguez. So in this situation, imagine that those roles were reversed. Kiki Rodriguez and Maya Taylor were stuck on Mars, and Matt Damon was in Los Angeles. You know, that it's interesting to think about how society would see that differently. Would society feel like that all this effort is still necessary when the person at the other end of it looks like, you know,
Matt
Kiki
Damon.
Rodriguez, or instead of Matt Damon, instead of you know what I'm saying?
I think you have a point there. But I would also say that I would also argue that, you know, Matt Damon is such a big star that if he were to be in Tangerine, that movie probably would have won many awards.
Well,
But
it's an example. It happened with, I'm trying to remember if it was like Prince William, I think. So way back in the day, before Prince William had married and had kids, he did this thing where, I think it was Prince William, where he would spend one night sleeping on the street as a way of drawing attention to homelessness and so forth. But of course, then the next day he's back in the palace. So it's interesting where we are willing to put our focus. So where it's Prince William sleeping on the street, then we are paying attention. We are interested in the plight of homelessness because he is drawing it there. But where it's just someone we pass by sleeping on the street, then this is not the emergency that requires, our collective effort. But what if we were to put that kind of effort into solving homelessness, into solving poverty, the same effort that we put into solving COVID, or we put into solving any
the
number
Matt Damon
of
on Mars situation.
the
Yeah,
Matt Damon
I
on
hear
Mars
you.
situation. What happens when we spend the same amount of resources, put the same amount of intellect into solving homelessness that we do to rescuing one guy off of Mars? And I think that's the kind of imbalance of the Martian at the end, is because if you think about it, while they were rescuing this one guy, how many people died of, preventable disease? How many people starved to death? How many people, and then that's just, if you look at it from the lens of America. Now we start going to other countries where, poverty is even worse. And, where is our attention going? Are we interested in Ukraine because the people in Ukraine are white and live in towns that look like our towns and look like white Americans,
Pleasantville?
and as opposed, Pleasantville, as opposed to, say, when we start moving into conflicts in Ethiopia or other places where they don't, live in towns that look like our towns, and they're not white. And
yeah, I think that's a natural thing. It's a natural thing where, you wake up, you look at yourself in the mirror, you look at the person next to you, and you look at your family and you see similarities with other people, and then you tend to be attracted to that similarity thing. So that's a natural thing. What becomes unnatural is to actually totally disregard other people and totally hate other people because they are not like you. That is unnatural. That is not natural for human society. That is that is something that is not something that you should be teaching that is taught. I mean, before I had a kid, I never understood when I realized that there were differences in people. I couldn't figure it out. And I think that watching, my little kid growing up, and he sees another person, doesn't matter who they are, what color skin they are. He is at first shy, and then he goes and gets to know them and he plays with them and this and that. And so I find that like normal. I take him to this kind of like, he's 2 years old. I take him to this swim school and with other kids, and they're just all kind of looking at each other and, getting used to each other. And they kind of like, after a while, they play with each other. They don't really care. They're just a bunch of kids roaming around. And so I think to myself, well, when does it start that they start to hate somebody else because of, the color of their skin or the way they live or the way they dress? When does that occur? And so it has to be taught. And so I think that media presenting the Martian the way they do totally affects the audience that watches that versus, Tangerine, right? I mean, you see Tangerine, you see, the media is portraying these people of color this way, and then they're portraying white Caucasian that way in the Martian. Well, that is some subliminal stuff going on there, right? I mean,
yeah,
there was like Michael Pena. He always plays the kind of like the person of color but the comedian, right? And then
Mhm.
of course you had everyone else was white, so I
Well, I
couldn't.
think, was it EQ4? EQ4 was
Yeah,
in
that's
there.
right. I forgot he was in there, but he was kind of like the scapegoat, I guess. Don't get me wrong.
Also,
Oh,
the guy from Eternals,
yes,
um,
yeah, I know.
the
No, you mean
Bruce
like
character.
from Wong.
Yeah,
Wong, yeah.
yeah.
Was he? No, no. Was he from Eternals or was he from Doctor Strange?
He might have been from Doctor Strange. I might be mixing that up.
No, yeah, yeah. I think the guy from Eternals is actually the guy from Train to Busan.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I think that guy is from Train to Busan. I could be wrong. I could be wrong, but if you remember in Train to Busan, there was a big, I think, Asian guy that was fighting them, and I think that was him. I could be wrong, but yeah. So there were some, but that kind of got me thinking. Let me take a look at all of the NASA astronauts. So I googled all the NASA astronaut teams, and it's actually in America. The NASA astronaut teams, there's like a bunch of them, are actually um, they make up about the percentage of America, like 75% white, 10-12% person of color, and then everybody else in between. you know so it's pretty interesting, but on the movie The Martian, it was one person of color on that team,
Well,
so it's pretty interesting.
and I I don't necessarily fault their cast selection.
Yeah,
Um, except for that it is so difficult to look past that same media portrayal of the value of a white life, the value of a white victim, or it's just such a common and repetitive theme that it's hard for me to see how the world goes crazy over a stranded white astronaut without saying that they're a white astronaut.
yeah,
Does the world go crazy, over the same, situation if it's not a white astronaut? And
yeah,
I think that the movie doesn't really address that. Um, it kind of leaves that unspoken. But
yeah,
that's kind of the problem, and that's kind of where it leads us back to. And of course, I'm not saying that there's that should that situation truly occur, that person's life is not valuable,
yeah,
that Matt Damon's life is not valuable. But I think also it's just, that's the mess we're in our
yeah,
current society, is that the option to simply ignore that
yeah,
this is a common theme that just happens over and over
yeah.
again.
Now, just so I can put some context to that. Now, this is an American film, so you're gonna have somebody who is a cast, like they're probably going to have somebody who's sat down in a room, says, yeah, we should cast this person, that person, this person. Having said that, I watch a lot of Korean dramas as well. So in Korean dramas, they're all Korean, or not all of them, but they're all Asian. They're all Asian. So I do remember them making a movie where one Asian actor was stuck somewhere, and all the other Asians actors were trying to rescue him. So it is a little bit different in that context, but I guess I can't really fault, like you said, I can't really fault in this situation in Martian. I can't really fault the casting, because they probably just decided to cast the really good actors for this show, and they were all very good actors, very established, like you said, and every one of them could probably star in their own movie, or maybe they have, you know. So, but I find it interesting, the storyteller, the one who wrote the story. When they wrote it, who did they think? Did they think that the audience would have been more sympathetic to, I don't know, Will Smith or some other person of color in the lead role besides Matt Damon? I don't know. That's an interesting concept that I would like to sit in that room when they're casting people and hear what the casting people have to say about it, because it's just an interesting thing to me that you know, there is pretty much no other nation out there, um, like America, where it's pretty diverse and stuff like that. But it's most other countries, you know, they may be diverse, but it doesn't show it as, and they're very deliberate about that. This is Korea, you know, we're made of Koreans, for example. This is Vietnam, you know, we're mostly Vietnamese, so on and so forth. But, you know, Germans, for example, Germany has a lot of Germans, but they also have a lot of other people as well. You watch a lot of German movies, it's not many non-Germans in there, you know? So I don't know. I just find that interesting. The casting, I'd like to sit in the room and hear what they're thinking about when they're casting somebody for a movie.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to say. Is how did they do in terms of the story? So if you were completely blind to, you know, societal implications of what they're doing, how does the story function on its own? And then how is it always possible to ignore or forget the implications that this has to do with society? You know, like they're two different things. And I think that on one side you could make the argument that this is just for the sake of the movie itself, that the movie is self-contained and that doesn't need to reflect the society in which it is created from. But I think that's hard to do. And you know, that I think that necessarily means that from different societies, say if it's Vietnamese or Korean or, you know, something else, they're going to have different perspectives on that. You know, I think that one of the things that's very different when I hear it is that when we talk about, say, for example, you know, whitewashing, or we talk about, you know, Scarlett Johansson playing a Japanese character, from an American perspective, we get really upset by that. But then from, say, a Japanese perspective, they're fine with it.
Yeah, I know. I hear what you're
nothing.
saying. Yeah.
but that's
Yeah.
just because it's about how do we fit the story into society? Do we need to fit the story into the society? What role does the society have in our judgment of the story?
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that I would say that at some point you take home the lesson of the movie to your society, and that it does inform the society, that Gone with the Wind informed our society, and that it contributes to us as a people. And so that's the question with The Martian, is this gigantic effort to save one man who happens to be white, versus our ignorance and our looking away from every other problem that we face in society that mainly affects people of color, is something that we can't ignore, that does fit into the society, and that the narrative of The Martian is continuing that sort of willful, you know, neglect and that we see
That's
today.
an interesting question you asked. I think that what you mentioned is that does the story of The Martian, could it basically move forward and be as influential, depending, no matter who the characters are, no matter who plays the characters? I think so. I think so. I think that I think you're right. I think that anybody could have played Matt Damon's part. Anybody could have played any of those characters' part, and it would have probably been the same effect. You know, it's kind of like 12 Angry Men. You know, that play 12 Angry Men, the jury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that it's a fine example of, you can put anybody in those roles and it would still be it would still be good, you know, because it does show, it goes beyond skin color, it goes beyond this and that, it gets to the meat of humanity, of philosophy, of whatever, and it actually is no longer about the plot or the story, but it's about the characters themselves, and how they are affected by what's going on around them, by their own experiences, and how they survive or push forward as opposed to giving up, because Matt Damon could have just given up and died, and that would have been the end of the movie.